Yaakov Ephraim Parisi was born to an Italian Catholic family in Brooklyn, not far from the world headquarters of the Lubavitch Hasidic Jewish movement.
It was in a Jewish neighborhood, and I was raised Roman Catholic, and I went to parochial school, and the Italian Jewish neighborhood, my best friend was Jewish, and we went everywhere together. So I was a pretty good kid when it came to my religion, and when it came to my studies, I excelled in most of my studies. And then they put me in a special class where they mix boys and girls, which is not normal to do. And you go for 1 day a week. You go to the priest. He gives a lecture, and then you get to mix and have some entertainment after the class. But during those classes, I asked a lot of questions, and I was always asking questions. And in the Catholic Church at that time, when you ask too many questions, they don't like it. And I asked a few questions during the first time I was in the class, and they threw me out. They said, "We don't ask those questions here. You're out of here." So, and I didn't get to go to that special class anymore.
At the insistence of the nuns in his school, Yaakov Ephraim's parents wanted to send him to a seminary to become a priest. But he resisted. He didn't want to be a priest.
When I took the test to the best public engineering school in the state of New York, Brooklyn Technical High School, and I passed the test, and I held that letter of acceptance the whole summer until I had enough courage to tell my mother I'm going to public school. And as a Catholic, going to public school is a no-no. It just doesn't happen. You got to go to Catholic schools. And so they called the nuns and the priests, and they all started to talk to me, and I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to go. I'm going to go to public school. And the nuns and the priests told my parents that I would never amount to anything and that I was on a road paved to you-know-where. And, here I am today.
As a young adult, Yaakov Ephraim ultimately became disinterested and estranged from Catholicism.
I left the Catholic Church because you stay home with your parents. You're in an Italian home. You live in your parents' home. You have to do it, they say, until 21. And they went to Catholic Church. I had to go with them. But the day I turned 21, I said, I'm never going back to Catholic Church again. So I wouldn't go back to a Catholic church. And then I was working. Then you get married. And then you have children. And everything's going good. And, you have a house. You have cars. You have money in the bank. Everything is fine. But something was missing inside. Something was missing after these years.
In the mid-'80s, Yaakov Ephraim moved to California with his wife and kids. In his newfound desire for spirituality, he looked to once again join a church. But what kind of church?
But anyway, so I said, I'm going to go to a Protestant church. Why? Because the Protestant church protested against the Catholic Church. No, Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation. I said, I'm a good protester. I'm a good rebeller. I'll go. And so there I went in this church, and we walked in, and the pastor was really nice, and it was 325 families. We were in California, 325 families in the church, and they welcomed us, and we started going, and we felt good. We felt like family. I started studying, and I liked it. And then one day, the pastor called me in his office. This is about 1986, 87. He calls me in his office. Meanwhile, now we grew a lot. In 1985, he called me in his office, and he said, you know what? You look like you're good for this. Maybe you should go to Bible college, and maybe you should, get ordained.
After he was officially ordained as a pastor, Yaakov Ephraim was given a task which would forever alter the course of his life. It would ultimately lead him on a long and unlikely journey to Judaism.
So one day he came to me and he said, I want you to learn the subject, and I want you to learn it good. And I want you to know about it better than anybody else. And I said, really? What is it? And he said, I want you to come in my office. And he opened up the Bible, and he opened up to the third book of the Bible, the third book of Moses, and it's called Leviticus, Vayikra. And he went to chapter 23, and he went to verses right at the beginning, and he read them, and he said, these are the feasts of God, and these are the festivals of God. And he said, you shall keep Shabbos forever, and you shall keep, and then it goes on, you shall keep Passover, and then all the Jewish holidays are listed right there. And he said, I want you to learn Passover, and I want you to know all about it.
The pastor of the church wanted Yaakov Ephraim to learn about Passover, to learn about the Last Supper. But the more Yaakov Ephraim learned, the closer he became drawn to Judaism.
And in 1987, that started on me on a learning career, and 15 hours a day. I would get up 4:30 in the morning and start learning at my dining room table. My wife would bring me breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the table. That would work most of the time, unless I had to go give a class somewhere, or go to a church service, or go visit somebody in a hospital, something like that. Some duty came up. But most of the time, I was at that. You can find me at that table learning.
Soon he started buying and consuming Jewish texts. He and his wife learned together and grew together. As a result, he became exceedingly estranged from his community.
And so they took away all my teaching jobs, all my responsibility. I was allowed to call people from the back room for events, and that's all I was allowed to do.
As expected, Yaakov Ephraim was eventually pushed out of the church in California. But soon after, he got a call from a small startup church in Oklahoma. The guy on the other end of the line heard that he had an unorthodox message and wanted Yaakov Ephraim to come and lead the new church.
Oklahoma. Anyway, so he said, I told my wife, and she said, what do we got to lose? Let's go. So we went there in the beginning of 1992. And we walked into the house, and there was a table with some food on it, a guy and his wife. That guy called me, I knew him and his wife, and then his little girls, met them. And then I was walking around, and I said, is there something wrong, Pastor? I said, is there anybody else in this congregation? And he said, yeah, there's another family, but they couldn't make it. Another family? You brought me all the way out here to Oklahoma, and you and another family, and that's your congregation? I thought you said you had a big congregation that, you want to learn this stuff. He said, yeah, we will have a big congregation. You can do it. I'm telling you, there's a lot of people here that's willing to do this.
But even in Oklahoma, Yaakov Ephraim, as a pastor of a new and up-and-coming church, started to question Christianity and was inevitably moving closer to Judaism. Before long, his congregants began to leave, and he started receiving threats from the larger community.
And now we started to get phone calls in the middle of the night. Are you Jewish? We don't want your kind in this town. What are you doing here? We don't teach from the Old Testament. This is a New Testament city. What are you doing that stuff for? We're supposed to be teaching faith. And all night, every night, and then worse, and then people in the streets, and then you start to lose friends, and your colleagues, the other pastors in town, stop talking to me, and then the neighborhood, big community leaders stop talking to you, and then you start to lose family a little bit, and you start to lose brothers and sisters a little bit, and you're losing half your congregation, and then you decide you're going to keep Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, and then you lose more people, and then one day you come, we're going to keep Yom Kippur.
Shortly after, Yaakov Ephraim and his wife closed down their church in Oklahoma. They were at a pivotal junction in their lives, and they resolved to convert to Judaism. There were many obstacles. The nearest Jewish community was in Denver, and they were uncertain whether they would be accepted. They had to forge ahead, and they made the trip out to Denver to meet with the rabbi, who would ultimately accept them and bring them into Judaism.
I said, Sarah DeVore, all our studies, I know we went through it all, but we want to be Orthodox, because that's what we want to be. And I said, but did you see the guy? And she said, yeah. I said, yeah? The guy with the big black hat? The guy with the big beard? The guy with the long black coat? I said, I know those guys. They're from Brooklyn. They're overboard. Those are Meshuggah. I want to be Orthodox, but those guys are nuts. I said, that's too much for me. And she said, no, let's go in. We'll talk to them. They'll be fine. And so I went in and talked to this Rabbi Twersky. And my wife talked to Rabbi, 2 hours of an emotional talk. And he said, you guys come whenever you want.
Conversion wasn't simple. It was a long process. They had to learn more than ever and integrate into the Jewish community. Yaakov Ephraim worked 3 jobs to pay the rent. All the while, he never missed a prayer or a learning session in the synagogue. After over a year and a half, the day arrived, and they were finally permitted to immerse in the ritual bath that concludes the conversion process.
But when we got dressed, we went over to the table, and the rabbis were standing there, and they ask you your name, what name you pick, and I picked my name, and sometimes they want to change your name, sometimes they want to question why you picked that name, and I said, okay, I want Yaakov Ephraim, and they said, Yaakov Ephraim. And they said, okay, and Sarah DeVore. And then they picked me up, and they started twirling me around, dancing, Siman Tov, and Mazel Tov, and Siman Tov. And then they said, Yaakov Ephraim, do you know that you were at Mount Sinai over 3,000 years ago? Do you know that you were always Jewish? Do you know you heard the 10 Commandments with all the other Jewish people, you and your wife, Sarah DeVore, Mazel Tov, and Siman Tov? And I said, Rabbi, what are you doing? What are you, crazy? I said, you put me through a year and a half of torture, and now you tell me I'm always Jewish? And they said, no, we just found out when you finished coming out of the mikveh. And that started the greatest life.